What's happening, old school scares, and welcome back to our Halloween series. Right now we're going to end up the season right now talking about our top 10 favorite horror movies of all time, or what I call my perfect 10 movies. If you've seen me do ratings on the channel, you know I typically don't give a 10 out to anything. These are 10 movies I give a 10 out to, and there's a couple other movies I could have, some honorable mentions that I didn't have on the list, but these are going to be my 10 greatest horror movies of all time. I'm going to go through chronologically. So I'm not going to do a 1 through 10. I'm not going to rank them, but I think these are the perfect horror movies. If you're sitting down and watching this video, you're getting ready to kind of finish up spooky season. We've had all of the horror movies, the yard haunts, the pumpkin patches, the haunted houses. It's now all coming to a head. You've got the trick-or-treaters are done. You're sitting down to watch that last scary movie before we get into Christmas season. These are 10 amazing movies that I'm going to recommend for you, and I think you can't go wrong with any of these movies. So please check them out. Throw your comments down below. If you have a different opinion than mine, I'd love to hear it. If you agree with the movies on this list, tell me why you love them. And then, like I said, maybe give me your top 10 horror movies of all time. Please share. We're going to start with 1954's Creature from the Black Lagoon. It might be the movie I've talked about the most on this channel. I love Creature from the Black Lagoon. I think it is a perfect movie, especially for the time frame that it came out. It was the end of the Universal monster movies. Universal had had amazing success, over 40 movies over a 25-year window at that point in time, right? Because Dracula and Frankenstein had come out in 31. We're at 1954. We're in a completely different place, right? We're outside of World War II. We're outside of the Great Depression. We're now into, the boomer age. We're now into the Cold War. This movie was perfect for the time, and there's a couple of reasons why I love this movie as much as I do. When I think about a perfect movie and why I rate this movie so highly, I'll talk about a couple of things. One is the amazing acting in the movie all the way throughout, whether it's the main characters, it's the secondary characters, the monster acting in the movie, Rico Browning being able to hold his breath for 4 minutes underwater in the suit, to not take away from the experience that the audience was having by seeing the bubbles come up. Just everything is right about this movie, and I'll tell you, I've seen it, obviously in black and white TV when I was a little kid on a 13-inch TV. I've watched it on my big screen at home in Universal's 100th anniversary collection for their classic monsters. In 3D on a 3D TV, it looked absolutely amazing, and then I had the opportunity to see it at Universal Halloween Horror Nights a couple of years ago on the big screen. And this movie really does come through no matter which version you see. It looks amazing. It's always interesting when you go back to older movies with underwater photography, how it looks. And this one is great. Everything about the movie is right. It's scary enough. The monster is realistic enough. The acting isn't wooden like you'd find in some of the, the older monster movies. It's just a really well done movie that tells a great story, an exotic location of a really cool monster. And when you add all of those things together and you keep at a really tight running time, you have, in my opinion, the first of my perfect 10 movies. All right, let's talk about our second movie on the list chronologically, and that's going to be 1956's Invasion of the Body Snatcher. Now, for me, this is an interesting movie because a lot of folks that love horror would actually have the 1978 version with Donald Sutherland and Leonard Nimoy as their better version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, taking place in a big city like San Francisco. It really kind of upped the scare factor. But to me, Invasion of the Body Snatchers always was and always will be a Cold War allegory. It's that movie that's talking about communism taking over, where we lose a little bit of ourselves and a little bit of our soul, so we look the same, we act the same, but we've lost our emotion. We've lost our ability to feel. And this movie was the allegory for that time, right? It was our neighbors weren't quite who we thought they were. Our friends weren't who we thought they were. Our family wasn't, right? It could be your mother, your sister, your brother, your wife, your uncle, right? Anybody, those folks that you've known your whole life are just all of a sudden a little bit different. And it was a really cool Cold War allegory. Now, here's the thing in this movie. A lot of people would complain that they tacked on a happy ending in this movie. I don't have a problem with the end of this movie. Do I think it would have been a better movie without the tacked on ending? Maybe, but I don't think it diminishes this movie, and I still really feel like it gives me I give this movie a 10 because it gives me a sense of the spirit of the time when the movie was made. When I look at this movie, this and the movie Them really make me think of the 1950s when I watch these. When I watch some of the other movies I love from the 50s, it's almost more like it's taking me back to an even older place in time. but these feel very contemporary to what was happening in America in the 1950s, and it does an amazing job of telling that story at that time. And again, if you want to be scared out of your wits, think about that person that's sitting next to you is all of a sudden there's a pod under their bed, and their energy, their life force, their soul, everything's being sucked into this pod, and they're going to change, and you're not going to be able to tell out from a physical difference, and they know everything. All the memories are there. Everything is what it's supposed to be, but something isn't quite right, is downright terrifying. So for me, it's another perfect 10 horror movie. Guys, the next one for me is pretty easy. It's a cheat code almost. It's from 1960, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. Let's talk about why this movie is a perfect 10, and I've said this on my reviews of Psycho in the past. I don't have to go very deep into the movie. There has been volumes of information written about this, documentaries more than you can imagine, stories on YouTube, all the reasons why this is an amazing movie, but I'm going to hit on the 3 that really put it over the top for me and make it a perfect 10 horror movie. Number 1, no one wants to call it this, but to me it is the first slasher movie, and while it doesn't have the gratuitous gore that you'd have later on in movies like Halloween or Friday the 13th, it does have that first slasher vibe, and it's very well done. The second thing is, this is the first movie that changed how audiences watch movies. Hitchcock came out and said, I'm not going to let you come into the theater if you don't come in on time. What used to happen is audiences would come in 20, 30 minutes late to a movie, and they would just take away what they had from the movie without knowing the total story. Well, if you came into that in this movie with Janet Leigh's character, you were completely lost. The third thing is just the audacity for Hitchcock to kill off his main character early in the movie. And do it in such an amazing, memorable way, right? Maybe the most memorable death scene in all of Hollywood history. The shower scene in Psycho is stunning. It's shot incredibly well. Even just, the death scene when she falls down in the shower and it goes from the scene of her eyeball into the drain. And, that symbolism for her life draining away. As you see the lifeblood being drained out of her, you see her eye and her body just... The light going out of her eyes and then the lifeblood just circling down the drain. It's just absolutely amazing. Stunning visually. Everything about this movie is just very well made. Again, it's a very tight movie. You're under 2 hours. Everything has a purpose. The characters are all really good. They all work together. People also make realistic decisions here. It isn't a movie that people are making dumb decisions that they fall into. So everything is great about this movie, just the way it's made, the cinematography, the acting, the directing. Stunning movie. Enough is said about Psycho. I don't need to go any deeper. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. Again, one of the greatest movies ever made, and another one of my 10 out of 10. Camera angle, we've got some Jaws stuff here and here. Let's talk about the first blockbuster movie, 1975's Jaws. A movie that really brought Steven Spielberg to the forefront, although if you've seen this channel, you know I've done my review on The Duel, which I absolutely love. Love that movie. Might be my favorite Spielberg movie. But Jaws is a perfect movie, and when I say a perfect movie, it is the right level of scariness. It is an amazing story. It's an adventure story. It's a high seas adventure. It's a story of challenges from middle-aged men that are, trying to go through and take on this larger-than-life adventure. It is a tour de force of acting with some of the best acting you'll ever see in a movie. And it has a great monster, and the monster's used enough because it wasn't great visually. It's used enough to be scary, but not too much to be goofy like we'd fall into in the later Jaws sequels, especially 3 and 4, right? 2 isn't terrible. I actually like 2 quite a bit, but 4 is, let's be honest, 3 and 4 are very, very bad movies. But 1, Spielberg understood, we needed enough of the shark to make it, terrifying. We need to have effective death scenes, like, the little Kittner boy, the scene in the lagoon where, the kayaker gets attacked. I think it's, and I'm going to say Ben Willis, but I know that's, I know you did last summer, but the head popping up under the water, which was that jaw-dropping scene that got added in at a later date because they felt there wasn't enough scares in the movie. Everything just comes into play in the right way with those actors, with the secondary actors. I've talked about this before. Jaws has some of my favorite secondary characters ever in the movies, whether you're going with Brody's wife, you're going with the mayor of the town. Just these characters are so good. And it starts with an amazing opening scene, right? Christy Watson's death at the very beginning. It just starts everything the right way for this movie, and it doesn't let up the whole way. It's like a great old wrestling match where they understood how to build ebbs and waves, where it would come in peaks, where it wasn't all like, I think of movies like The Terrifier right now, which is a very funny, gory slasher movie. But that movie just comes at you relentlessly, where there's so much coming at you, you can't take the breath to be scared or shocked or awed. It's just, a level of, let's go next effect, that it loses its effectiveness. Jaws understood what it was, and it never lost its effectiveness. That's what makes it an absolutely amazing movie. In the 1970s, we're going to go to 1979's Alien. Again, when we talk about a perfect movie, talk about this movie understood what it was. It was a deep space thriller coming off of Star Wars and all the cool stuff that was the people's love of outer space. But let's be honest what this movie is. It's an out-of-space haunted house movie. And that's what makes it amazing. When you have a haunted house movie set in space, you have nowhere to go. I think about Jaws, which we just talked about. You're in the middle of the ocean on a boat. Like, you can't get off that boat and go anywhere because the shark is there. You're screwed. Well, think about that amplified and in space. Now you really can't go anywhere. You're in the confines of this spaceship with an advanced life form. And this movie I love because this movie also tells the parable of, not listening to what you're supposed to do in protocols. If you think about this movie, Ripley did what she was supposed to do. She tried to quarantine the crew from coming back in when they had contact with an alien species. She was overridden by a commanding officer who thought he knew best to try to take care of his people, and he cost everybody their lives and the ship. And when you think about that, and you think about Ripley's character as a strong, amazing female lead, and really out of all the movies we're talking about, really the first female lead out of all of these movies, she's amazing in this movie, right? You start to think about the monster effects, and I love a ton of great monster movies. Pumpkinhead, I'm looking at you, I love this movie, but Pumpkinhead, you're a xenomorph. And there's a ton of other monsters that are xenomorphs that came out after this movie, and the xenomorph is one of the coolest monsters of all time. It's scary, acid for blood, can evolve in just a matter of hours and days. What else can you say about this movie? Everything is great about it. Great acting, scary, great procedural from like a military standpoint, right? Like everything's just so cool. It's just so well done that I would tell you again, a movie you cannot go wrong with. And when you watch it with the lights out, it's actually scary enough as well with a great monster. So this next one's very interesting for me. I am going to talk about a Nightmare on Elm Street movie, but it's not a Wes Craven directed Nightmare on Elm Street movie, which is a shame because my second and third favorite Elm Street movies are the original and the new Nightmare. But I think most of us would agree the best Nightmare on Elm Street movie of all time is The Nightmare on Elm Street 3, right? You get into the Dream Warriors. It is an amazing movie for so many reasons. I think this is the movie where Freddy really found his voice. He was scary. He was funny. The acting was good. The special effects were good. They kind of knew who Freddy was as a character. In 1, he was gritty. In 2, he was really nasty, but there was this kind of this real world element that was strange. In 3, he was kind of a smart aleck, but it wasn't so far over the top that it became really comedic like it would get into like movies 5 and 6. It was the right tone of the Freddy monster. And again, with great acting, again, Heather Langenkamp in the movie. You'd have a great secondary cast with folks like Lawrence Fishburne and Patricia Arquette as secondary characters in the movie, and then obviously Robert Englund bringing back the iconic Freddy Krueger character. I'll just talk about this movie. The reason I have it as a top 10 movie of all time and a 10 out of 10. Again, great acting, great characters, great storytelling, no retconning yet. So Freddy's still relevant from what we've learned in the first couple of movies. We haven't shoehorned any new information in. And some of the most creative kills you've ever seen on screen. And Freddy was still really scary. So we don't really need to go much deeper. Just an amazing movie, and in my opinion, by far the best of the Elm Street movies. And I would say maybe the greatest slasher movie ever made. What we're going to talk about is from 1990, and we're going to talk about Candyman. And Candyman is a love story / horror romance that is so well done. It brought Tony Todd to light. We had great acting throughout this series. We'd have so many good characters in this movie. Everybody in this movie just plays the right role. And Candyman's scary enough. And what I love about this movie is it's actually a slow burn for the first 45 minutes when we have these grad students trying to figure out if Candyman's real or what the mythology of Candyman is. They don't believe that he's real. But in Cabrini Green in Chicago, which was this really rough part of Chicago where there was a lot of gangs and a lot of violence, Candyman was kind of used as a parable to keep kids from doing the wrong thing or keep people in their house. Gangs were using it. And when they actually exposed that Candyman wasn't real, it was one of the gangsters, is when Candyman had to come back and say, hey, no, I am real, and I have to come back and prove it. And when you think about the premise, like, it's so well done, and it really is a story of class, right? So you think about these young ladies who are grad students living on a wealthy side of Chicago versus these poor urban folks on a poor side of Chicago in Cabrini Green, and they're living in the same housing, right? The houses that were built were actually, these luxury condos were built on the same format as these projects, and you start to realize, like, this class separatism isn't, is really strange, right? It really isn't all we think it is. And when you go back and learn about who Candyman was, and while he was killed by the father of someone he was contracted to paint because they had an unapproved love affair, an interracial love affair back in the 1800s, it's a really sad, poignant love story that's also terrifying. Like, Candyman is great. I remember when this movie came out, like, no one would say Candyman 5 times in the mirror, and Tony Todd plays it picture perfect, and he would go on to be amazing in a ton of other horror movies. I actually really love him in the remake of Night of the Living Dead also. I think in the early 90s, Tony Todd was amazing, and you'd see him show up in the Final Destination movies and some of the Hatchet movies later on. Just a great actor, and we really came to light in the horror genre, mainly in the Candyman movies. So please check it out. Again, great pacing, very scary, very gory, but an amazing love story at the beginning. And a really cool drama, slow burn piece that doesn't really get going till about 45 minutes in. So very cool. I felt kind of bad. How do I do a Nightmare on Elm Street not have a Wes Craven movie? Well, I will have a Wes Craven movie on my list. And that Wes Craven movie is going to be 1996's Scream. I did the 25th anniversary review of this movie on the channel 2 years ago. This is just an outstanding movie from every aspect of it. The only thing when I was making this list that I thought potentially could hold this movie back as a demerit is this movie actually does use technology as a key piece of the story, but the technology is very dated to the time. But it's not its fault. Like, I'm not going to go back and ding it for that because I think when you look at everything else in this movie, Casey Becker's death at the beginning, which came out of nowhere, really the most shocking opening death since Psycho many years ago, where you kill off your main heroine early. Nobody saw Drew Barrymore, who was by far the biggest star in this movie at the time by a huge margin, being the first person killed in the movie. So that was amazing how they did that. And then you think about just the acting in the movie. There's enough gore in here that it makes it a good gory slasher, but it's not over the top. There's no gratuitous nudity in the movie. Like, there's some coarse language, but it's not crazy. Like, it was an R rating, but it was, like, to me, it was a soft R. Like, it was more of a PG-13 type movie. Where I think if you're looking for a great entry-level slasher to get someone into the genre if they want to see, and it plays into the, it plays over the fourth wall, it breaks down a lot of barriers, it's very meta, like, it understands its place in the universe as a horror franchise that lives in a world where other horror movies exist, and it's better for it, right? And, this was the only movie out of all the Scream movies, in my personal opinion, that didn't do a crappy job with the final reveal. Like, I think the final reveal was very good. The motivation was somewhat questionable, but I still think it was really good and suspenseful. So as a suspense horror movie, it's great. As a slasher, it's great. As a teen drama from the early, mid-90s, it's great. It just shines across all different genres from when it came out, and it's very... All right, so this is going to be my toughest one to add in for you because it's also a very tough movie to watch. All the rest of the movies I've given you, I actually think are really fun, and I think you'll have a great time watching any of them. Like, none of these are actually tough watches. I am going to give you a movie that I think is so well made. I think it's one of the greatest horror movies I've ever seen, and I think it's so strange because it stands so far above what everything else this other director has done that I wish he had done more like this. And I'm talking about The Devil's Rejects from 2005. The second movie in that Firefly trilogy you'd have, along with House of a Thousand Corpses, and then Three from Hell. This movie is so good, but it's so bleak. When I was making this list, I was really torn between this and Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer with Michael Rooker. That movie is so good too, but so bleak. But because of the budget they had and when it was made, it's really low budget looking. Like, this movie just looks really good. Like, it's less grindhouse than you'd have with, like, Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, but it's no less bleak. The Firefly family is amazing in this movie. The acting is so good across the board. The secondary characters that we feel for are amazing. You know, people like Brian Posehn, who have an absolutely brutal death. Priscilla Barnes. The characters they brought in to play like the protagonist to the antagonists that are the Fireflies. William Forsythe as the sheriff's brother from the first movie who gets killed. Danny Trejo and Diamond Dallas Page as the bounty hunters looking for the Firefly family. You know, even Ken Fiore and Michael Berryman as, you know, these folks that run like this brothel out in the middle of nowhere where, you know, our anti-heroes go to kind of convalesce and hide. Everything is so good about this. But to me, the real key to this movie is a couple of things, right? It's not Sherry Moon, who's very good in the movie, but it's Sid Haig and it's Bill Moseley. They play such good bad guy characters. While Sid Haig, you know, is making the joke when his truck breaks down to steal someone's station wagon and he knocks the mother out and the kid's terrified. And then he just looks at him. He's making jokes. He seems very harmless and very jovial. Then he just turns on a dime, you know, and tells the kid, you better have a reason why you don't like clowns or I'm going to come back and kill your whole family. Or Bill Moseley when they try to escape and they hit him with the tree branch and they get him on the ground and he gets over him. And he's like, pray to your God to strike me down. Oh, and he's just taunting them as he's about to beat them to death out in the middle of this field. It's just so brutal. Like, this is a brutal movie, but it's so well done. It's so well acted. It's shot so well that I cannot not have it in one of my top 10 lists of all time because I think, again, it is a perfect grim horror movie. So if you like a grim horror movie, you know, something like this, something like Hereditary, which is very grim, Henry, there's a few really good grim movies out there. I just think this is the best of the bunch. All right, we're going to wrap up our list with our 10th movie that I give a 10 out of 10. And we're going in a completely different direction than we just went in with one of my favorite movies of the last, I can't say decade anymore because now it's 11 years old, but I'll still say the last decade or so is 2012's Cabin in the Woods. A horror comedy that is one of the greatest horror comedies I've ever seen. It has smart characters. It uses all the tropes of horror movies. It has all of the monsters ever from horror movies in it. It's just so fun and so well done. It is by far my favorite movie of the last decade. And what I love about it is it plays into all the tropes of all the horror movies across all of the world. And, you know, and it talks about these ancient gods. You know, I know James wouldn't do it on the kill count, but if he did, this movie would have the highest kill count because we kill everybody at the end of the movie, right? Everybody dies. The whole world. Because they couldn't stop it. And it's also about, do you sacrifice yourself to save the world? But if you have to do that, is it a shitty world and is it worth it? You know, the very much questioned button that lets all the monsters loose, or the whiteboard that has the name of all the monsters, which is awesome. Like, just everything about this movie is fun. It's well acted. It's well directed. Visually, it's good. There's got some really cool monsters. It's got some great kills. Again, ever since I saw this movie, I've loved it. I've watched it many, many times. You know, from a more contemporary movie, it really came down to this or Trick or Treat. I think this movie doesn't suffer for some of the pacing challenges that 2007's Trick or Treat does. So for me, this is a top 10 all time, and I absolutely love the movie. All right, everybody, that's it. Thank you for checking out the channel. Thank you for checking out all of our movies through Halloween, our Halloween Yard Haunts, all the stuff we did at Halloween Horror Nights, Hallowscream. It's been an amazing, busy Halloween season. I've had so much fun sharing all these videos with you. You know, as we get into the end of the year, we'll do our best and worst of the year, and then we'll do some different movie reviews as the year goes through. But you know, these couple of months of September and October are really the bread and butter of this channel. So please subscribe. Here's the deal, guys. I'm trying to get onto Media Day next year for Halloween Horror Nights and for Hallowscream. I need to add more subscribers in. I need to add more views. So if you see the channel and you like it, please subscribe to the channel. We're trying very, very hard to be more part of those things so we can bring more of that content to you earlier and earlier every year. Thank you, everybody. As always, stay scary.